There's a pattern that almost nobody talks about openly because it's too uncomfortable to name. It goes like this. Things start going well. Real momentum. The kind you worked for. A project that's finally coming together. A relationship that's actually healthy. A version of your life that looks, from the outside, like exactly what you said you wanted. And then somehow something goes wrong. Not because of bad luck, not because the circumstances changed. Because you did something. You missed the deadline at the exact wrong moment. You picked a fight that didn't need to happen. You disappeared from the project when it needed you most. You sabotaged the thing that was working, right when it was about to work. And if you're the kind of person this happens to, you probably have a theory ready. Timing wasn't right. I got overwhelmed. I'm my own worst enemy. You might even laugh about it. The self-aware shrug that says, I know, I always do this. But the laugh tends to land a little hollow, because underneath it is the harder question. Why? Why specifically when things are good, does some part of you start working against you? The answer is not about willpower, and it's not about fear of failure. What's actually happening is something quieter, more structural, and considerably more strange. A conflict happening inside the self, between the person you're becoming and the story you've always told about who you are. To understand self-sabotage, you have to start with something that sounds almost too simple. People don't just want to feel good, they want to feel consistent. This is the core finding behind what psychologist William Swann named self-verification theory in the early 1980s. Swann's observation was counterintuitive enough that it reshaped significant portions of social psychology. He found that people are not primarily motivated to seek positive feedback about themselves. They are primarily motivated to seek feedback that confirms what they already believe about themselves, whether those beliefs are positive or negative. Consistency, it turns out, is more neurologically compelling than flattery. The logic isn't mysterious once you see it. Self-concept, the working story you carry about who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve, functions as a kind of operating system. It tells you how to interpret events, how to predict others' responses, how to make decisions under uncertainty. An operating system that holds needs to be stable. And so the brain develops a strong preference for information that keeps the existing self-concept intact, and a strong resistance to information that would require rewriting it. For people with positive self-concepts, this is mostly comfortable. The feedback they seek aligns with the outcomes they want. But for anyone who has absorbed over years a story about themselves as someone who doesn't finish things, doesn't really deserve big success, gets close but never quite makes it, the mechanism becomes a trap. The feedback those people instinctively seek, the outcomes their behavior tends to generate, will be ones that confirm that story. Not because they've decided to fail, because coherence to the brain feels safer than the alternative. This is where Leon Festinger's work on cognitive dissonance enters the picture. Festinger, working in the 1950s, identified that when a person holds two beliefs that contradict each other, or when their behavior contradicts their belief about themselves, a specific aversive tension emerges. The brain experiences this tension as a problem to be solved, and it solves it through whichever path requires the least effort, usually by adjusting behavior to match the existing belief rather than adjusting the belief to match new behavior. So the sequence looks like this. You have a deeply held belief, often not fully conscious, often formed long before adulthood, that you are not quite the kind of person who sustains success. The project starts going well. Progress accumulates. And somewhere in the system, two signals are now running in parallel. The conscious goal of succeeding and the existing self-concept of someone who doesn't. That gap generates dissonance. And the brain, treating cognitive dissonance as a problem with a correct solution, begins nudging behavior toward resolution. The fastest resolution available is to bring the external reality back in line with the internal story, which means sabotage. Not chosen, not intended, often not even noticed until after the fact. Just the system doing what it was designed to do, maintaining coherence between what's happening and what you believe is supposed to happen to someone like you. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to see is that the sabotage rarely announces itself. It doesn't show up as a conscious thought that says, "I should ruin this." It shows up as suddenly feeling exhausted, right when the project needs a final push, as starting an argument in a relationship that had been, up until that moment, going better than any previous one, as losing interest in an opportunity precisely when it becomes real rather than theoretical, as getting sick, as having an unusually bad week. The explanations all feel legitimate in the moment, because they are. The fatigue is real. The argument had a real trigger. The interest did drop, but the timing, always right before, always at the moment of genuine forward movement, is not coincidental. It is the mechanism. Psychologist Gay Hendricks, drawing on decades of clinical practice, described this through what he called the upper limit problem. The observation that people carry an unconscious internal ceiling for how much success, happiness, or expansion they will allow themselves before the system pulls them back down. The metaphor he used was a thermostat. If the room gets too warm for what the thermostat is set to maintain, the system activates to bring the temperature back down. The ceiling isn't set by external circumstances. It's set by the self-concept, by the identity's existing picture of how much is normal, deserved, and safe for a person like you to have. Here is the detail that tends to land the hardest. The ceiling doesn't feel like a ceiling. From the inside, it feels like bad luck, overwhelmed timing, or evidence that the success wasn't really meant for you. The true cause remains invisible, which is precisely why the pattern repeats. If you never correctly identify what's producing the result, you can't do anything other than experience it again the next time the conditions are right. And the conditions will be right, because the self-concept stays in place. The self-verification drive stays active. Every new attempt at growth encounters the same thermostat, set to the same temperature, until the operating system itself is revised. Not the behavior, not the outcome, but the underlying story about who you are and what is possible for someone like you. The ceiling follows you from project to project, relationship to relationship, version to version of your life. This also explains something that self-sabotage theory often misses. The problem isn't always low self-esteem in the conventional sense. Some of the most consistent self-sabotagers are people who appear confident, accomplished, self-aware. The relevant variable isn't how good you feel about yourself in general. It's whether your identity has a specific, stable picture of how much, how successful, how loved, how visible, how financially secure someone like you is supposed to be. If that picture has a ceiling, the thermostat will maintain it, regardless of what your conscious goals are. The gap between the conscious goal and the identity ceiling is where the sabotage lives. And the closer you get to the ceiling, the more urgently the system works to bring you back down, which is why the timing is always the same. Not when you're failing, not when you're struggling, not when the odds are against you, right before the breakthrough, right when it's about to work. So, if you've ever looked back at a moment where something good fell apart and thought, "Why did I do that?" It's possible the more accurate question is, what did that moment threaten? Not your ability to succeed, Your picture of who you are. A picture that was probably drawn a long time ago by people and circumstances that no longer exist, but that the brain has been faithfully protecting ever since, because stability is what operating systems are built for. There's something quietly disorienting about the idea that the obstacle isn't lack of ability or lack of desire or lack of effort, but a story you've been carrying so long it stopped feeling like a story. It started feeling like just how things are. What tends to happen to you? Who you are when things get real. The success didn't fail because you weren't ready. In some cases, you were ready. The story just wasn't yet.